Hey, welcome to the channel. If you're here, you're probably either Googled Changeling or you're a regular viewer of the game channel that we run on this, where basically I DM pretty much whatever. Right now, as of recording this, we're doing Starfinder. However, something I learned pretty much while building this kind of channel is you can't quite have a channel dedicated to, tabletop RPGs unless you're willing to basically post your collection and talk about recommendations, that kind of stuff. And in this case, I have Changeling the Lost Second Edition. Can't really see it all that well on this one because I kickstarted it and it came with a really super awesome, nice embossed cover. It's all shiny and glistening. Um, you can an actual print on demand copy right now from Draft Through RPG. But cool thing about like anything that Onyx Path, like the people who essentially developed this thing, anything that they kickstart, if you back it, you have the option of getting usually a really high end version of the book. And I also got a storyteller screen because if I ever DM or GM or storytell, I like to have a good, a good collection of notes. But what is Changeling the Lost? Well, it's part of something known as Chronicles of Darkness, which is owned by White Wolf, makers of things like Vampire the Masquerade, Werewolf the Apocalypse. But pretty much, long story short, a little over a decade ago, they tried to essentially reboot the whole thing, and like their old game line with completely new versions of it, which some people disliked, some people really liked. It's very polarizing. I'm of the camp that I kind of like both, but I prefer the Chronicles of Darkness. That's what this version's called now. But the gist of both lines is that the world is really similar to ours. Whoever's president at the time of whenever you watch this, they're president right now. Global issues they're going on. The thing is, though, that in the Chronicles of Darkness, things are they're a little bit worse. Like, they're, like in your hometown, people tend to go missing, and they never tend to be found, or, bodies are found, but, the reasons they died doesn't quite make sense. And in this world, things like vampires, werewolves, uh, they they also exist and they run around in amongst humanity, and most of humanity doesn't really know about it, and the ones that do, they tend to not be believed because honestly, who's going to believe you when you tell them that a giant alligator man lives in the sewer? But Changeling, basically the story of Changeling is like it pulls inspiration from things like Grimm's fairy tales, anything by Neil Gaiman, just pretty much anything where like involves like honestly like fairy tales, like I was saying earlier, weird fantastical creatures and magical beings. A lot of it tends to pull a lot. Mostly from like Western folklore with this one. Although there's enough wiggle room to include things like alien abductions and stuff. So how does it work? Well, in the game, like most of the World of Darkness and Chronicles of Darkness games, you start off by creating a human, just a regular person, nobody super special, and basically, let's say that there's that your character, they go to this dance club one night and they're just having a great time, and they see like just the most beautiful person they've ever seen, like otherworldly. Maybe there's something about him, that about this other person, that like that's not normally your character's type. Like maybe your character is super into redheads, and this one's blonde. Maybe the person, maybe this otherworldly person is maybe a gender that you don't normally go for, but whatever it is, you're just completely fascinated by them. And you start dancing, and it's really nice, and they're really pretty, and you get close, and they smell like lavender, and not like the that kind of fake soapy stuff, but like the actual flower, and they start leading you on, and start kind of motioning for you to follow them, and you're trying to navigate through the crowd, and it's just really thick, and it's hard to keep up with them, and eventually they go down this hallway that you've been to this club a couple of times and you don't quite recognize this hallway. But hey, this person's clearly into you, so you start following, and as you're weaving around and stuff, you start noticing that like it's covered in like, black light graffiti, and starts like taking on like the graffiti starts to look like plants and stuff. And as you go further and further in, it starts like turning and stuff, but you're still following until eventually you find them, and they look at you and they tell you, you're a really good dancer, and I think I'm going to keep you a while. But the problem is, when they say they want to keep you a while, they really mean it. You're stuck with them. You're stuck with them for like what seems like forever, just dancing and dancing, nonstop, always dancing, until your feet just ache. Or let's say you're just some dude out in the country, and it's hunting season. It's the first day of turkey season, and you're super excited. So you're sitting out in the woods, eating a piece of beef jerky and really quiet, waiting for something to come across. When suddenly something does come across, it's not a turkey though, it's a deer, and it's unlike any deer you've ever seen. It's basically that deer creature from Princess Mononoke with like freaking 3 foot tall antlers and a face that looks just uncomfortably human, and it looks at you and it doesn't run away, but it just kind of just walks, and you what do you do with that? Well, maybe you follow it. Maybe you don't want to kill this thing. This thing it's so unusual and it's so beautiful and majestic, and you start following it, and eventually it leads you down into this glade, and it's part of the woods that you're just completely unfamiliar with. The briars and the thorns are just really thick, and they're scraping you as they go, and you start to feel just like a little lightheaded as you're walking, when suddenly your foot steps in a bear trap, like an old-fashioned bear trap from like the 1800s that shouldn't be out in the woods in your part of the country, and definitely wouldn't be working. It would have eroded long ago. I meant to edit that out, but wasn't really thinking. Anyways, this bear trap, it hurts. It's biting into the flesh of your leg, and it hurts so much, and you're screaming, but nothing's coming to help you. When suddenly something does come to help you. It's like this little, like, the closest thing you can describe it is it looks like a little boy. It looks like a little boy, but his teeth are just, he's got just way too many teeth, and his teeth are just a little too long, and his fingers, they bend just a little too much, like they almost wrap in around themselves like candy canes. And the little boy, he says that he can help you. He can even cure your wounds, but you're going to have to do some favor for him, and obviously you agree. And he does it, exactly, heals your wounds. But suddenly, you owe him a couple of favors, and he needs a new hunting dog. So no matter the circumstances, you're now trapped in what's known as the hedge, this otherworldly thing where these like unimaginably powerful creatures known as the true fae, they capture people. They lure people into this place, and and they basically just use them for whatever they need: servants, entertainment. Just whatever. These godlike creatures have complete dominion over you, and you're at their whims. You have to survive. You eventually, if you were brought in like the dancer, you have to dance nonstop. You learn all different kinds of dancing. If you're the guy who was hunting, you're hunting as as an animal, just nonstop, and your body eventually changes. The dancer, maybe their body becomes more lithe. They tend to they tend to take like a wispy appearance in order to survive in this. Maybe like they actually start to take on elements of of the air, like they're almost see-through. Maybe they can actually like cause like small little gusts of wind to accentuate their dance moves. Maybe the hunter, he starts to take on like a bestial appearance, like his snout becomes elongated so he can smell his prey more. Maybe since he's not allowed to use guns, guns are very primitive. There's no sport in guns. His hands start to develop like claws, and his hindquarters start to get stronger so he can lunge, and so he can stay warm out in the land of fairy, which is where you end up getting stuck. Maybe he starts growing like little patches of fur, and you're a prisoner of fairy for, it could feel like days, it could feel like weeks, it could feel like months, it could feel like years. And you do everything you can to survive. You learn little tricks in order to survive. You learn that this fire in this land, it won't keep you warm unless you strike a deal with the fire. Hey, fire, you do this for me, and you let me stay warm, and I will feed you a piece of wood every now and again. Like if you don't feed that piece of wood, it doesn't matter if it's an inferno, the fire, it's not going to keep you warm. Even if you're standing in the middle of it, you might burn to death, but it still won't keep you warm. So for whatever reason, eventually you escape fairy. Maybe the dancer, maybe they eventually, swoon, the person who brought them in so much, after a night of dancing and lovemaking, that the person, that their captive just ends up going to sleep, and this is their prime opportunity to escape. Or in the case of the hunter, maybe they end up chasing a rabbit, and they're going down through the thorns and the briars, and eventually they see a light, and that light looks like it looks like their porch light from back at home. Whatever the case is, you as the player character, you make a bolt for it, and eventually you tear your way back through the thorns and the briars, through whatever ends up capturing, whatever the environment is, and eventually you find your way back home, and you're safe and sound. Or are you? See, the thing is, time has passed since you were gone. Maybe not necessarily the same. As was mentioned, it could feel like you were gone for years, when in fact you were gone for minutes. Maybe you aged during that. Maybe you went in as like an 8-year-old boy, and you came out as a 20-year-old man, but only like a couple of days has gone by. Maybe it's just the opposite. Maybe you've only been gone like a couple of days, and you come back and 2 years have gone by. Maybe you come out and you pretty much see yourself stepping in right at that moment. Time works differently in the place that you went to. Furthermore, you're different. Your physical appearance has changed. The dancer, they tend to look like walking air, and the hunter, they look like a beast. But people, they don't seem to notice it. You look down and you see it. You see the changes that have wrought on you, but most other people, they do not. Furthermore, you get back and you go into your house and you see that, well, that's you standing there. That's you with your wife. You've been replaced by something that looks and sounds and thinks exactly like you. And that's awful. But you do eventually find out that there's others like you. In fact, there's whole communities like you. And they all call themselves changelings. And that's basically the summation of like the backstory of Changeling. So yeah, it draws from a bunch of different sources. Like I said, Grimm's fairy tales, anything by Neil Gaiman. Movies like Labyrinth, Mirror Mask. The book actually mentions a really good series that was on Cartoon Network called, I think it was called Over the Garden Wall. Hold on a second, let me look. Over the Garden Wall, created by Patrick McHale. Really good series if you haven't watched it. I think you can find it as of the recording on this on Hulu. Yeah, definitely give that a check out. It's Changeling. But in terms of like the system that it uses, pretty much all of anything made by White Wolf, and in this case, the actual developers over at Onyx Path Publishing, which, if I remember correctly, it's people who used to, like, they broke off from White Wolf way back in the day, but, it's still got a lot of ties, and they deeply understand the system that they've been making for decades. But pretty much everything you use involves a D10. You roll the D10, you aim for an 8, a 9, or a 10. Those are successes. You roll a big handful of them. And for each roll that's above 8, 9, and 10, those are considered successes. The whole system is built on variations of that. Specifically in the game, like let's say, you're wanting to shoot a gun. I would look at you and say, okay, as the storyteller, I would look at you and say, okay, what you want to do is you want to roll your dexterity and your firearms. So what you do is you look at your character sheet and you see that in dexterity you have like 2 dots. That means you get 2 dice. And for firearms, you have 1, which you get 1 extra dice to take it to 3. You roll the dice. And any of those dice that land on an 8, a 9, or a 10 are considered a success. And that's basically the system. It also builds on what it calls merits, which is like little like social, basically little wrinkles of your character, how much money do they have? Maybe they have a dot in resources. That means they got a little bit. If they got 5 dots in resources, that means compared to their local environment, they're really, really rich. Maybe they have a retainer, or a lifelong friend, or a loyal dog. Those are all covered in merits. And they're basically they're wrinkles that more they're less mechanics based and more fleshing out your character. In terms of actually level progression, like most games, you have an experience system, but instead of just accumulating oh, you killed an enemy, so you get 15 experience points. This game works a little different. The game is it's almost designed to encourage you to fail in a lot of ways. Pretty much, you get things called beats, which you always get a beat. You almost always get a beat if something bad happens. Like if you botch a roll, which in these kinds of games, if if all after modifiers you're down to like I believe it's 1 or 0 dice. Like you basically have like a single. You can roll a single die, but you have to roll a 10 on it. And if you fail that, it's not a big deal. But if you roll a 1, it's considered a dramatic failure, and things go really bad, and you get a beat. You can also opt, in a lot of instances, to take a dramatic failure. Just be like, you know what, I'm just going to take that dramatic failure. And, bad things happen to your character, but you also get a story beat. You also get story beats from things called conditions, like pretty much think of like status effects in like a video game or like a lot of other tabletop RPGs. Like, something bad happens to you, so you got to take a negative consequence. The thing with a lot of conditions is that in order to get rid of those conditions, sometimes you got to put yourself at risk. For instance, with the spook condition, which basically, your character has seen something supernatural, not overt enough to terrify her, but unmistakably otherworldly. How your character responds to this is up to you, but it captivates her and dominates her focus. That's something that's basically stuck with you. Some of them actually give you like a negative in certain attributes and stuff. But in any case, if you want to get rid of the spooked condition, basically, you resolve this condition when your character's fear and fascination cause her to do something that hinders the group or complicate things, like she goes off alone to investigate a strange noise, or stays up all night researching, or runs away instead of holding her ground, etc. So basically, the game encourages you, like, think of it this way. Let's say you're watching a scary movie, and you're sitting there, and the person, you're sitting there saying, don't open the door, don't open the door. The killer's behind there. You should know the killer's behind there. The game is giving you essentially an experience point for doing that kind of stuff. There's other ways to gain experience and beats in the game. But yeah, that's the difference between something like, say, this and like Dungeons and Dragons. This is heavily like these games tend to be more heavily focused on actual role play instead of just throwing dice, kicking indoors, and killing monsters. You can certainly do that in the game, but it more shines if you're looking for the kind of game where you're wanting to tell like an actual story and have people kind of like gather around and play off of each other. So let's get into the meat and potatoes of the game. What makes each character certain types of character. And it starts off at the very base with seemings, which is basically, what you were in Arcadia, the place where the true Fae took you and, wished you off in order to do a task. You have beasts. They tend to be like animals. They like the hunter that I mentioned earlier. They tend to take on like animalistic features. There's also Darklings. They tend to be secretive. They tend to hide. A little stealthy. They're really good at finding information, that kind of stuff. There's elementals. I mean, think the dancer that I was describing earlier. Like, they don't necessarily have to be of air. They could be of fire or of earth. Any of those kinds of things. But they tend to take on elements of that. There's also the fairest. The pretty people. Your lithe elves, your supernatural beauties, that kind of stuff. Ogres, big, strong, tough things, and the wizened. The best thing I can think of with them are like cobbler elves. You leave a glass of milk out, and they come in and they build on your shoes. Those kinds of things. They tend to tinker, things like that. Obviously, these things will give you certain stat boosts, but they also come with their own like advantages and disadvantages. Like in the case of the ogre, they tend to be really good at smashing things, and they can inflict certain status elements without too much trouble if they spend a little bit of glamour, which we'll get into later. But each seeming also comes with its own curse. With the ogre I just mentioned, one of theirs is they risk losing a little bit of a grasp on their reality, which actually has an in-game mechanic. But they tend to risk losing a little bit of that if they end up scaring somebody that they don't consider an enemy, like a friend or something. If they send that person running in fear, that kind of triggers something in their brain that they're just like, oh God, what have I become? And you risk, suffering in-game consequences for that. White Wolf games also almost always have some kind of like political thing. And in something that's, as heavily based on like medieval archetypes and fairy tales and stuff, of course, there are the court systems in this game. You got the spring court, which tend to focus on things like desire. You got the summer court, which tends to focus on, wrath and vengeance and, the good fight. Autumn, think Halloween. They tend to focus on fear. And winter, they tend to focus on sorrow because, it's the winter months that you tend to get down. And there are actual in-game benefits to joining a court. You actually get access to certain contracts, which is the game's abilities. Certain courts, you either have to be a member, and you can only be a member of one at a time, or have a really good rapport with a court. And those will give you access to certain abilities that someone who doesn't have any relationship to those courts would normally get. Be like, you know what, screw the courts. I'm going to go off and do my own thing. It's a perfectly viable option. You don't have to belong to any court in the game. There's also kiths, which the game's not entirely clear on what they are like within the story. I tend to think of it as like more fine tuning, like more just kind of like, one, it gives your character another ability, but it also tends to like, kind of like, let's say like, for example, with the dancer that I was talking about earlier, they could take the kith known as Playmate, which, let me see what I got written here on my notes. Playmate. People are prone to like you, and you can heal others at your own expense. I'm not going to go through the book and like, deep dive in that, but that's essentially what it does, and you can use that to build on a little bit of what your character did while they were in Arcadia and how they reuse it once they escape and try and function back in the real world. You can also pick probably one of my favorite kits, which is known as Gristle Grinder, which is just horrifying. Essentially, you're really good at eating things. You get a bonus if you get a bonus for any kind of grapple rolls that involve you holding something with the intent to eat it. And if it's a certain size smaller than you, you can essentially just unhinge your jaw and swallow it whole. That's horrifying. The system's also built on something known as the anchors system, which is your character's... well, the best way I can think of it is it's what keeps your character grounded and just not just going off into the deep end and into insanity. Each Chronicles of Darkness line handles them differently, but they all tend to follow a basic thing. One thing that they all have in common, it's known as a touchstone, which is it's always something that's grounded in the mortal world. Like in the case of a changeling, it could be all sorts of things. Maybe your touchstone is, the family that you left behind. Maybe it's, maybe it's a park that they always went to, or like once they escaped, that park was, maybe they ended up, living homeless for a little bit, and that park was, they had some good memories. That's where they stayed, and it's just they got an emotional attachment there. But the touchstones help maintain your clarity, which, as mentioned earlier, that's your grasp on, that basically keeps you from going insane. Having really low clarity can have dire consequences for your character. You can essentially just become so lost in madness that you're unplayable. It's kind of a fate worse than death. We also have something known as the needle and the thread, which essentially like it's a way to get back willpower, which is a little like it's an in-game currency that you can use to like give yourself just a little bit of an extra boost in order to accomplish certain things. But your needle is that's your core identity. Like that's pretty much like what the world sees. Maybe you're like a hard ass or something like that, and you get a bonus for like really you get a chance to replenish some of your spent willpower if you play as a real hard ass. And there's things that are listed in the books and ways to explain how to get that willpower back. There's also the thread, which is essentially it's what gives your changeling the purpose to go on, to wake up every single day and go fight the good fight or whatever it is that they're trying to do. This could be something that they're terrified of. It could be something that gives them hope. Whatever it is, it's their big motivator. And once again, if you essentially like if you put your party at risk or yourself at risk in order to chase that thread, you get a point of willpower. Again, this game openly encourages you to do things that would cause a little bit of strife, which can be good depending on your group, because the game is all about drama. Contracts are essentially your superpowers that you can do. That thing I was talking about earlier, where you had to make a deal with the force of fire while you were in fairy in order to stay warm. contracts are built on that. It's little like, ways you found to essentially like bend the rules of reality. And as I mentioned earlier, some contracts are only available to certain courts, and you gotta have like goodwill and stuff. Some contracts actually give bonuses to certain seemings. Like, let's say that you are a beast. You might find a contract that, gives everybody, everybody shares a certain bonus, but with beasts in particular, they serve it gives them just a little bit of an extra bonus. There's also loopholes. Contracts are spent by something known as glamour, which if you're think of a video game RPG. Glamour, it basically acts as your mana, or your MP. It fuels your supernatural abilities. But loopholes exist where, like, if you meet certain conditions in order while you're working out the ability to cast a certain contract, you have a couple of options. If you exploit the loophole, you can just not not spend any glamour, or you can still spend the glamour, but this thing is cast as like a reflexive action instead of like, something that takes a little bit of time and energy. There's also things known as Gobbling Contracts, which don't have any loopholes, and they tend to be really powerful, even at low levels. But there's a price, you see. Every time you cast a Goblin Contract, you accumulate something known as Goblin Debt, which the storyteller just makes a little mark next to your name in his or her little notebook. Post-recording edit. Goblin Contracts actually do have loopholes, but everything else stays the same from what I just said. Whenever the storyteller wants, they can cast in your Goblin Debt and cause like negative status effects to happen to you, or it can just accumulate to eventually you can't leave the hedge, essentially, unless you manage to trick someone into switching places with you. And that's a horrible fate for anybody, but it's the only way out of the hedge once you're that far into debt. The game is also built on making pledges and promises and stuff, because think of any kind of think of all different kinds of stories involving fairies and elves and goblins and stuff. I mean, a lot of them, there's some kind of like bargaining system that you got. Think of Rumpelstiltskin. Tell you what, I will spend a bunch of golden thread, and all you got to do is give me your firstborn child. That kind of stuff is in this game. It doesn't necessarily have to be that extreme, but who knows? Maybe you need a firstborn child for something. And there's various different types of pledges you can make for various different types of reasons. Some of them you make in order to, they essentially keep the True Fae and the Huntsman, both of which we'll get into in a little bit later, from noticing you in the real world. Sometimes it's a good way to like gain certain benefits and stuff. And there's always some kind of like negative consequence if you squelch out on the deal. You can also in this game dive into people's dreams. And experience like the crazy kind of fantastical things that go on there. Also venture into the thing I was talking about earlier, known as the hedge, which is a bit of a barrier in between this world and the lands of Arcadia. There's all kinds of crazy interesting things to find there. It's also incredibly dangerous. The other big thing in the game is it all focuses on glamour, which is something I mentioned earlier. And glamour is pretty much it's human emotion, like, condensed. Changelings need it in order to function on a day-to-day basis. They need it just as much as they need food and water. And there's certain ways to get glamour. You can't get it from other like fey creatures such as yourself or the True Fae or Huntsman or anything like that. It has to come from humans. But the thing is, basically, your changeling just has to basically wade into a group of humans and just soak in on their emotions. Let's say your changeling on his day job works at a funeral home, and it's just like, you know what? This is an easy way to to get a taste of grief and sadness, and they can feed on that. Maybe your changeling reads children's stories at the local library and feeds off of those happy emotions. Maybe your changeling is a dentist, and kind of uses that chance to really scare little kids. Great dentist, but scares little kids, feeds off of that fear. All these are ways to regain your glamour. In terms of the supporting cast in the game, it's huge. I mean, first off, there's the other changelings, obviously, friends and allies in that. Most changelings, they tend to band together. However, some of them still think that their former masters had some good ideas, and they're actually kind of working with them on the side. Maybe they're actually trying to sell out their changeling brethren, Maybe they're luring humans into the hedge so that the true fae can capture them. Maybe you could do either of those things as a player. It's up to you guys. There's also fetches. I mentioned at the beginning with the little backstory, with the little introductory thing, that sometimes when you come back, you see that there's an identical clone of you that's taken your place, made of, bits of, maybe like bits of twigs and an old dried up mummified rabbit's head with a little pinch of your shadow, and it looks and acts exactly like you. Those can play a huge part in your chronicle, or none at all. Like all these, like anything in a storytelling game or any kind of RPG, it's up to you. But I mean, that thing is there, and if you want to make it a huge part of the story, you absolutely can. There's also the true fae, which are these just indescribably think the best way I can think of it is think of like a Cthulhu, H.P. Lovecraft-esque, undescribable horror filtered through Tim Burton. I actually forgot that name for a second there, but yeah, eldritch horror filtered through Tim Burton, like the old school Tim Burton aesthetics. That's essentially a true fae. They're indescribably powerful. Their needs are mercurial and almost twistedly whimsical. And no one quite knows why they need human beings. Their reasons are as weird and different and vast as they are. And there's also the huntsmen. The huntsmen aren't. The book is really open-ended on what they are, but they seem to predate even the true fae. But they're essentially these creatures that the true fae have found a way to manipulate into going after changelings. And these things are completely relentless too. They can actually be like almost reasoned and bargained with. Like they'll talk to you within the hedge. Like when they're in the hedge, they tend to have a good chunk of their own mind. They still have to do what their masters say, but they probably wouldn't mind telling you, hey, if you go do this, I can stop this. They do not like the fact that they are under someone else's control. Once they get out of the hedge and into the real world, though, they are single-minded, like Terminator single-minded, and they blend in perfectly. And you don't even notice them until they want you to be noticed. Or rather, they want you to notice them. There's also hobgoblins, which are denizens of the hedge. They could be anything from just the natural flora and fauna there. They could be other changelings that accumulated goblin debt and they can't leave now, or they stayed in the hedge for so long that they just end up getting lost in there and they can't get back into the real world. It could also be humans that wandered in there and for whatever reason made a deal with one of the residents there, and now they can't escape. There's also ghosts. Ghosts live in the hedge, and they'll interact with you, and you can see them. Like any World of Darkness or Chronicles of Darkness game, mortals can, and in my opinion, should play a huge part of the game as well. Your character was, at one point, human, and part of their life in the game involves, trying to be human and trying to pick up the pieces after they came back and found out that the world's very different from when they last left it. Your character's going to have friends and family. And, yeah, absolutely, they should play in the game as well. Changeling also lends itself incredibly well to other non-human denizens of the Chronicles of Darkness. Some games work for it better than others. Like, for instance, a game like Vampire or Werewolf, since both of those games can potentially involve, staking territory and making big, local politics moves and stuff, it would make sense that they would bump into other supernatural denizens of the night. Changeling's the same way. Especially since even the other denizens of the World of Darkness and the Chronicles of Darkness, they tend to think that you're there's something weird about you. Changelings are instinctively they tend to stay insular and stuff, and they tend to not be overly trusting of other residences in their community that aren't entirely human. But those guys can play really well in your game as well as part of the supporting cast. Now the thing I've been discussing is, of course, the second edition, which you can kind of see right there. You see it really clear right there. But yeah, this is the second edition of the game. And if you're coming from the first edition, you're probably going to wonder, if there's any differences. If you're not, Well, this is a nice little addendum anyway. Like any kind of new editions, there's been a complete overhaul. I'm not going to go too crazy into all of that, but needless to say, in the first edition of the Chronicles of Darkness games, like you had to have two books to run anything. You had to have essentially the base books and the template books, which, I mean, it wasn't a great system. I understood why they did it, but now they just include, like, all you need is this book in order to play. You don't need to buy any other book. All you need is the core book. That was loud. In terms of the system, combat is a whole lot faster and a lot more dangerous. I've noticed there tends to be a lot more things that can cause just flat out lethal damage, and if you're not careful, you can die really, really fast. The XP system has also been completely overhauled with what I was talking about with like conditions and things like that. The whole thing, as I mentioned, it's built on earning beats. Different things give you different beats. Like getting critical failures, achieving certain goals, like in amongst your character, achieving certain goals within that particular story will get you beats. Conditions can grant beats if you get rid of them. Some conditions are stuck with you for like essentially ever, but there's ways to get beats as you play on it. And once you get 5 beats, that turns into 1 experience. And you get certain amounts of experience, you can buy new things. You know, you can boost your stats, you can get new contracts, you can increase something known as your weird, which is essentially how in tune you are with the supernatural world, like how deep you're willing to go into what makes a changeling truly, like, I don't know if inhuman or beyond human is the best term, whichever way you want to look at it. I'd also say in the second edition that characters are much more customizable. You can, like, but the way they completely redesigned the kits and the seemings, you can come up with some really interesting character designs. Goblin contracts are also, adjust my glasses. Goblin contracts are also completely overdone. In the first game, Goblin contracts were, if I remember correctly, they were really powerful, but they always had some kind of catch. Like, you know, it would come back and bite you in the butt some way or another. But in this one, it's much more of a, you know, you can keep using it, but it's ultimately up to the storyteller when it's going to come back and bite you in the butt, and it can really build up, and you can get some really dire consequences. I think it's a much better risk versus reward. It's one of those, like, you know, whereas in the first game it'd be like, I don't want, you know, I guess I could cast this, but, you know, it's going to cause like 1 level of lethal damage. That's an okay thing. Whereas in second edition, it's just like, you know, okay, I'll cast that, and, you know, I won't worry about it too much. But, you know, you keep casting it, and you're gonna build up more and more. I feel it's much more of a better, you know, much more of a risk versus reward system. Like, you know, I can go ahead and get this reward right now, but at some point, the more and more it's built up, it's going to bite me. In terms of changes within the story, there's the addition of the Huntsman. There was something kind of similar in first edition, but this one, I mean, it's taken center stage. Like, the story is really built around the idea that these weird characters are, you know, they're always after you at all times. And, you know, you can build an entire thing on, you know, you essentially building a relationship with the Huntsman, while you're also trying to avoid them, but, you know, essentially, you know, doing a favor for them so they don't have to hunt you anymore, because they don't want to. They most of them would just much rather just go back to sleep. I've noticed in the second edition that it also pulls away a little bit from one of the core, I guess, themes of the first book. The first book had a bit of an overarching theme of the relationship of abusers and the abused. In fact, a lot of people have called the first edition essentially a survivor metaphor, and I think that's apt. They've kind of pulled away from that in the second edition, for good and for bad, as weird as that sounds. I will say that the first edition, like, I mean, that can be a really touchy subject for a lot of people, and I understand why they would kind of pull away from that. And in the second edition, it's a lot more of a, you know, maybe you were abused, but, you know, you're not necessarily cowering in fear at all times. You know, your character could be, you know, they could be living a life where they're just, you know, they're just giving the middle finger to the true Fae at all times, you know, actively fighting against them. However, the first edition, like, the true Fae, I felt as they were written in the first edition were a lot scarier. Like, especially since they also cover the roles that the Huntsman did in that. Like, the True Fae, like, they could appear at any time, and that's one of the reasons that the Changelings banded together into their communities, was essentially because it's a whole lot easier for the True Fae to pick off individuals than it is a group. So yeah, less of an emphasis on the survivor of abuse metaphor, but I feel like overall it's lost that sense of dread, of just overhanging dread that the first edition had. But there's no reason that you couldn't necessarily include that in the game. Like most things, I feel, especially with something that can be that kind of heady, make sure that your group kind of roughly knows what they're going into on that. But but yeah, and that's Changeling the Lost Second Edition. Do I recommend it though? Honestly, it depends. It really depends. I absolutely love the system. I love anything made by Chronicles of Darkness. If Onyx Path is going to make something, I'm already immediately interested. Even if the final product doesn't necessarily woo me, it always at least grabs my attention a little bit. I will say though that with this, your group basically all needs to kind of be on the same page and know what kind of game they're getting into. Maybe recommend them this video. And also, one thing I've noticed with a lot of the Onyx Paths games, and a lot of White Wolf's games in general, it really benefits the players if they actually read the book. I know that sounds really weird, but you get something like Dungeons and Dragons or Pathfinder or Starfinder, which if you're new to the channel, we are currently running that as of this thing. But those books, I mean, if I'm being completely honest, you can pick up the core books on that and essentially just like turn to the races, turn to the classes, and turn to the combat rules, and the rest is just fluff. Like, it doesn't take a whole lot of research on a person playing a player character's part to jump into the game. With a Chronicles of Darkness game, it's a little different. It helps to understand the basic rules, which I would probably say run just a bare bones Chronicles of Darkness game where characters are just playing as regular mortal humans, which I might do a video on that in the future. But the bare bones Chronicles of Darkness game is a really good way to introduce the basic concepts, like how combat works, how healing works, how health works, how social roles work. It's a great system for it. Something like Changeling or Vampire, it also, it has all that, but it's also built with the idea that, you apply this other template. Because like with Changeling, you add things like contracts, the ability to shape dreams, the ability to essentially shape the hedge into what you want it to look like. You got pledges, you got contracts, you got all those things on top of the base system. And, if a player's, if they want to actually have a chance to do that kind of stuff, well, they're going to have to read up on the book. And for some players, that can be a little bit intimidating. But, you definitely need to let them know, do your homework a little bit. I mean, understand how your powers work, which, frankly, I think that's a good thing that players should do anyway. The DM/GM/storyteller, they can only do so much. But yeah, in terms of recommendation, I'd say, yeah, if you're like super into like, like the idea of like, the darker side of like Grimm's fairy tales, or, if you really had a crush on the Goblin King from the movie Labyrinth growing up, any of those things, I'd say Changeling is absolutely worth checking out. And that's pretty much it on Changeling the Lost Second Edition. Be sure to like, comment, and subscribe. Be sure to check out the other channels. If you want to follow me on Twitter, you're more than welcome to. I'll throw a link in the doobly-doo. There's also one on the About page at the top. All that good stuff. And take it easy. One more post recording addendum. If you're interested in getting it, you can pick up a PDF copy as well as a print-on-demand version from Drive-Thru RPG. Again, link in the doobly-doo. And yeah.